The man found her at dawn, when the light was still unsure of itself and the world looked half forgiven by night. Mist clung to the low ground near Red Willow Creek, and the fence cut through it like a scar, posts leaning, wire rusted, meant for cattle that had long since wandered elsewhere. At first he thought an animal had been caught there, some deer or stray horse thrashing in panic. Then she moved, and the chain rang softly against the iron. She was bound upright, wrists fixed above her waist, ankles tangled in brush. Her head lifted at the sound of his boots, slow and deliberate, as if he were approaching something that might break if startled. Her face was bruised, dirt ground into her skin, but her eyes were awake, too awake for someone who had been there all night. She watched him the way a storm watches a field, ready to pass or destroy. He stopped several paces away. The morning wind tugged at her torn dress, and only then did he realize she was shaking, not from fear alone, but from cold. Before he could speak, her lips moved. The words came out hoarse, practiced, as though they had been demanded of her before. "Do whatever you want." The sentence landed between them and stayed there. He had heard men say worse things with laughter in their mouths. He had heard surrender shouted, begged, prayed. But this was different. This was emptiness speaking, a giving up so complete it no longer fought back. He did not answer right away. He took in the details instead. The iron cuffs not made for her wrists, the fresh scrape on the fence post where someone had tightened the chain too far, the faint pattern of beads still sewn into her sleeve. Apache work, careful even when everything else had been torn away. Someone had wanted her seen here. Someone had wanted her broken. He felt anger rise, sharp and useless, and forced it down. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuttoned his coat and held it out, not stepping closer until she nodded once. When he draped it over her shoulders, she flinched, but did not pull away. The shaking eased a little. "You don't belong on a fence," he said at last, his voice low, almost unsure. Her eyes narrowed, searching his face for the lie she expected to find. But there was none. And for the first time since the chain had closed around her wrists, confusion cracked through her exhaustion, letting something fragile and dangerous stir beneath it. The idea that this man might not be like the others. He returned after a short while, long enough that she wondered if she had imagined him, if the cold and exhaustion had finally begun to pull tricks on her mind. But then she heard the creak of the fence, gate, and the soft splash of water sloshing in a canteen. He moved carefully, as though sudden motions might undo whatever thin balance had formed between them. He stopped just out of arm's reach and set the canteen on the ground, nudging it closer with his boot. After that came a small bundle wrapped in cloth, bread, dried meat, nothing fancy but real. The smell alone made her throat tighten. Hunger had become a dull ache she barely noticed anymore. Yet now it surged back with sharp insistence. She did not reach for it. Her eyes stayed on his hands. "I won't," he said quietly, as if answering a question she had not spoken. "I'm not here to hurt you." She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, brittle and humorless. "They all say something," she replied. Her voice wavered, then steadied. "Then they do what they planned anyway." He nodded once, accepting that truth without argument. He sat down on the dry ground facing her, close enough that she could see the lines in his face, far enough that she could still breathe. When he spoke again, it was not to command or promise, but to offer small pieces of himself, his name, the fact that the land used to belong to his wife's family, that the creek flooded every spring, whether anyone wanted it to or not. She listened despite herself. Listening was safer than hoping. When she finally reached for the water, her fingers trembled so badly she spilled some onto the dirt. He did not move to help. That more than anything unsettled her. Control had always come with hands, with force. Here there was none. The key rested heavy in his pocket. He could feel it every time he shifted his weight. He knelt after a while, close enough now that she stiffened, muscles screaming in protest. Her voice broke through her teeth. "Just finish it." He paused, meeting her gaze. "No," he said simply. "Not today. Not ever." He drew the key out slowly, and unlocked only one cuff, the metal clicking open with a sound that made her flinch harder than pain ever had. He did not remove the chain entirely. He loosened it, gave her room to lower her arm, to shift, to exist without tearing herself apart. That night, he built a small fire where she could see it and lay down with his back to her, his rifle set aside. Sleep came to neither of them easily. But something else did, an unfamiliar quiet, where fear was no longer being fed. Trust, she realized, did not arrive all at once. It came in careful pauses, in what he chose not to do. Morning came gently, as if the land itself were careful not to startle her. The fire had burned down to ash, and the chill in the air carried the scent of wet earth and pine. She had not slept so much as drifted, waking at every sound, every shift of his weight. Each time she opened her eyes, he was still there, breathing slow, turned away from her as he had promised without words. When he finally rose, he did so quietly, stretching stiffness from his shoulders. He did not approach at once. Instead, he walked to the creek and washed his face, giving her time to prepare for whatever this moment would bring. By the time he returned, the sun had climbed high enough to touch the tops of the trees. He stopped in front of her and opened his hand. The key lay in his palm, dull with age, harmless looking for something that had decided so much of her pain. He did not lift it. He did not move closer. He simply waited, her eyes fixed on it, her breath shallow. Freedom had once been an idea she carried like a wound, something remembered but no longer expected. Now it was here, small and solid, and it terrified her more than the chain ever had. She searched his face again, slower this time, tracing the lines of fatigue. The patience held tight behind his eyes. Carefully she reached out, not for the key at first, but for his wrist. Her fingers closed there, feeling warmth pulse, proof that this was real. He did not react except to still himself, letting her take whatever certainty she needed. Only then did she lift the key. Her hands shook as she fitted it into the lock. The mechanism resisted for a breathless second before yielding. The chain slid free and fell to the ground with a sound that seemed far too loud for such a quiet morning. She stepped back instinctively, half expecting something to follow, shouting, pursuit, the snap of consequences. Nothing came. She straightened slowly, muscles aching, spine remembering how to stand unbound. She walked to the creek, knelt, and washed her hands until the water ran clear, carrying away blood and rust and the weight of the fence. When she stood again, the sun warmed her face, and she closed her eyes, letting it happen. "You freed me slow," she said at last, turning back to him. "That matters." He inclined his head, as if accepting something he had not known he was being given. She did not linger. She moved toward the trees, steps unsteady but determined. And when the brush closed behind her, the fence stood empty at last. He remained where he was, listening to the quiet, understanding that some freedoms were shared without being kept.